Hey, what's going on, everybody? I don't know what the hell's going on. For some reason, Facebook is not. It's not finding my camera on my laptop. I don't know if you can hear. I can turn this around so you can see it. But this is what I'm getting. And every time I try to click on it, waits for camera, shuts it off again. So that's what we got. So anyhow, so I just decided I'm going to do this thing on the phone, and I'll deal with my other issues later. So and I think that they only allow me to do like 1 hour live streams on Facebook. So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm stuck with here. So let me pull up let me pull up tonight's story. And I might have to do everything old school. I've been having so many issues with social media, TikTok especially. Now, TikTok, I used to do some pretty goofy things on there when it first started. But right now, the only thing I use TikTok for is to make little snippets from my shows here and put them on there just to advertise, to get people to go over to the Facebook page or onto YouTube. Anyhow, yeah, they kind of, hey Steph, how you doing? Hey Shannon, good to see you. So yeah, I don't know. So anyhow, TikTok, I've been trying to make, I've been trying to make these little preview videos, AI preview videos, and I have been getting reported for breaking community standards. One was misinformation, and the other one was, what was the other one? Hate speech. And I'm like, I'm just reading stories from my book, so I don't understand. So I'm guessing it's somebody out there trying to troll me or whatever. I don't know. I don't really get this social media shit. So I just like it because it's it makes the world smaller and we can converse like this or whatever. So, but anyhow, let me get into this right away. Again, it's from my latest book, Thin Spots. If you haven't picked it up, you can find it on Amazon. And I should have it, some copies to bring to Bobby's store to sell, and also a copy to give to the Winthrop Library and possibly Gaylord Library as well. Anyhow, tonight's story is called The Pale Ones. And basically, this is an origin story for a previous story that I had written called Eva. Eva was she was a pioneer woman, but she was also a vampire. And she was a Native American vampire. They were called Jumlins. So that is who we are hanging out with tonight in tonight's story called The Pale Ones. So without further ado, this is kind of a long one, and I want to get this whole story in before, I don't know, Facebook shuts me off or whatever. And also, I am not feeling well at all. I'm losing my voice, for one. I've got quite a bad cough, and I just do not feel good. So I gotta keep myself going long enough to get tested, get my skills test done for my EMT classes tomorrow night, and then I am probably gonna just try to get better, rest and relax. So anyhow, enough of that. Let's get into the story, and if we got more time to talk, then we will chat about it more later. So it's telling me I got a bit of a slow connection. And I'm on Wi-Fi. How about that? So anyway. Okay. Let's get into the story. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And we will jump into this right now. The pale ones. The pain had subsided by the time the robins were singing their morning songs. The hemp ropes creaked under the muscled weight of Redbird's body. The hooks were sticky with his blood, but held fast throughout the night. His ceremony was almost complete. When the sun began to blaze through the cottonwoods, he was cut down, and the medicine man attached a buffalo skull to one of the ropes, still attached to his back. The drums began to beat out the heart rhythm of Earth Mother. "You must dance now," the old shaman said. "Dance until the sun is at its highest, and then we will meet in the sweat lodge." Redbird, elated from his sun ceremony, let his spirit go to dance with the pounding of the buffalo drums and the songs of his people. His vision had played in his mind throughout the night and into the morning, and now the images were becoming increasingly clear. He stopped dead in his tracks, and his eyes flipped open. They were red with exhaustion, but filled with sheer terror. He let out a blood-curdling yelp and fell into the dust. The drums stopped, and his people began to walk towards him. "Do not touch him," the shaman said. "Something has shaken him in his vision. Do not let the bad juju corrupt your own." The old medicine man pulled out his bundle of sage and began to smudge himself, scooping up the sacred smoke and bathing himself with it. He repeated the same with Redbird and lifted him up. "Come," the old man said. "We must begin immediately." Redbird was cold to the touch and shivering. "What was that?" he asked hysterically. "What did I see?" The shaman wrapped him in a blanket and took him into the sweat lodge. He stoked the fire and then called for the chief and the elders. "What is it?" the chief asked. "I cannot be certain yet," the medicine man said. "But I think whatever was seen needs to be shared with you and the elders." When all were gathered in the smoke lodge, and the heat was at an almost unbearable temperature, the shaman asked Redbird what it was that he saw. "Pale ones," he said. "Not like the newcomers, but like us." The chief gave a nervous glance at the shaman, who returned it. "How many did you see?" asked the shaman. "More than us. They have already begun to feed on the white man's villages." The elders began to murmur with one another, and the chief silenced them, but had the same look of worry on his face as everyone else. They will be here in the next cycle of the moon. They've already began scouting us. They're hungry." The village of Gerhardt Mills was started 15 years ago when Brandon Gerhardt had moved his family deep into the woods near the town of New Ulm, Minnesota. They had a nice cottage by the river and support against the Sioux from nearby Fort Ridgely. Brendan ran a textile mill, and within a few short years, others had come and settled in the area. A rough trail led into and out of the main square, where there was a trading post, a small saloon where one could get a meal and a beer. There were even 2 spare rooms above that would house a weary traveler or a drunk. There was a small livery and blacksmith shop and a sawmill just around the river bend from Gerhardt Mills. Brendan fancied himself the mayor, the sheriff, and judge in the village since he laid claim to the land. And he had the connections to nearby Fort Ridgely. Nobody complained, and if they did, they took it to Brendan. He had 3 daughters and 1 son. The son, Friedrich, was his youngest and tried his best to please his father as much as a 10-year-old boy could. Nyla, his wife, and she fussed over daughters, Tanya, Joy, and Linda. Friedrich was asked to fetch some water for the horses one morning. "Take Linda with you," Brendan said. "I can handle it on my own, father," his son protested. "That may be so, son, but do as your father tells you." The boy begrudgingly grabbed his sister, and they grabbed the yoke and fastened 2 large wooden buckets on it. "I'll carry it," Friedrich demanded. "Suit yourself, brat," Linda said. They walked down a ways to the point that separated their father's textile mill and Hendrick's sawmill. A spring ran down from the wooded hills and into the deep gorge that fed out into the Minnesota River. It was darker and cooler here. The lushness of the trees and plants still glowed under the canopy of the tall aspens and cottonwoods. The terrain was rocky, and Linda tried not to chuckle when her brother got tripped up on the slick moss-covered rocks. When they reached a large pool, Friedrich lowered the yoke, and they both grabbed a bucket each and went into the pool. "Mother'll be angry with you for getting your dress wet," he said teasingly to his sister. "Well," she said indignantly, "I'm not undressing to my drawers with you here." The water was waist high and cold. They shivered a bit. "It's cold," his sister hissed. "Go all the way in," he said. "Get your head wet. Then you get used to it quicker." She held her breath and then dipped her head under the water. She came up giggling, her dress floating around her like a jellyfish. There were trout swimming about, and really good-sized ones. "There's fish!" he hollered. "I'll bring some home for dinner." The thought of slimy, scaly fish disgusted Linda, and she immediately pulled herself from the pool. Friedrich laughed and pulled himself out behind her. "I can't believe I was in there with him," Linda said, holding herself. "I'm going to go find a stick so that I can sharpen it into a spear," he said, walking off. "Don't go far, Friedrich." There were plenty of branches and deadfall in the woods, and he had pulled a few vines thinking they were branches and then tossed them aside. The cottonwood branches were brittle and fell apart, and it was the same with the birch trees. Finally, it found a long, thin branch of oak and wrestled it from the log it was attached to. The branch snapped and gave way, and Friedrich ended up on his bottom. He huffed out the air in his lungs, and he rolled over to regain his breath back. "I'm okay," he shouted over to his sister. There was no answer, and he became angry that she didn't care, that he may have hurt himself in the fall. He pulled himself up and bent down to grab the branch that would never become the fishing spear he dreamed it to be. He stumbled back over to where his sister was, and he stopped several yards from where he left her by the pool. "I said I'm okay," he muttered. He wasn't sure what he was seeing. There was a man, nearly naked, bent over his sister, who was lying on the ground. The man's skin was white, as if it had been painted that way. Her bare feet stuck out from the hem of her soaked dress, and they were wiggling. "Linda?" he said. He watched closer, and he could hear wet slurping sounds. The man was grunting like a pig at its trough. "Who are—" The pale man stopped and raised his head. Fear-filled Friedrich's body as the man turned to look at him. The man's hair was long and looked gray, but really, it was lifeless and ratted in snarls. His skin wasn't painted. It lacked any pigmentation at all. Its eyes were watery and rimmed in red. From his chin, blood streamed as clots of flesh hung in ropes to his chest. "Indianer," he muttered. It was his father's word for Indian, but it was not tanned skin like the ones he had seen in New Ulm and along the trail. This one seemed diseased or cursed. He tried to scream, and a pale hand covered his mouth. His eyes wide with surprise and terror. The hand clamped tighter and made him screech, and the owner turned him around. It was another Indianer. This one was female, and pale like the other. Friedrich tried to scream, but the woman slammed him into the trunk of a thick old cottonwood. He began to see stars. The woman's eyes were red-rimmed like her partner's. She hissed at him, and then she bore down onto his neck. The pain was raw and violent. He could feel her teeth chew into his flesh as he kicked his feet. He tried to grab the pocket knife his father had given him last year for his birthday, pulled it from its sheath. He swung his young arm, and the woman caught it. She pulled her head back from his throat, mouth covered with his blood. And then she snapped his wrist like he had snapped the branch from the log. More pain went up his arm, and the gash in his throat thrummed its own rhythm of pain as his life jetted out over the woman's face. She laid him on the ground, his limbs flopping, and she bore into his neck again. He felt her lips sucking the life from him. Slowly, the woods got darker. General Malcolm Curtis sat by the fire with his bare feet absorbing the warmth of the flames. He just finished packing tobacco into his pipe and lit a piece of straw to light it. He puffed several times until the bowl was smoldering, and he let out a thick cloud of smoke from his mouth. He and his men had been stationed here at Fort Ridgely for 14 months. It was their duty to deal with the unruly savages that were known to attack the smaller villages of settlers, and also his duty to pass out the promised rations to the docile ones who agreed to the treaty. He failed at upholding the white man's end of the agreement. The government had promised to feed and clothe the redskins in trade for leaving their hunting grounds and settling further west. Sometimes he held out on supplies, depending on his mood. He would claim that supplies were low and hadn't come in from nearby New Ulm. But that was false, as he and his men would divvy out what they wanted and leave the rest, if any, for them. "General Curtis," the soldier said, interrupting a relaxing moment, "there's some people here to see you." "More Injuns?" the general said. "No, sir. It's Mr. Gerhardt. He's here with a few of the townsfolk." The general let out a sigh and put out his pipe. "Send them in," he said, with some irritation. Brendan came in with worry and grief on his face. His eyes were puffy like he had been crying. There were two other men as well, looking equally worried, and they were carrying 2 children. "Gerhardt," Malcolm said, "what's this all about?" Brendan said. "My children. They've been murdered." The children were laid onto 2 long benches. Both kids were absent of color, almost a bluish gray, and their eyes were cloudy and empty. There was a large gash in both their throats, but no blood. "Did you clean them up before you—" the general began to ask. "No, General," Brendan said. "I brought them exactly how I found them." Malcolm turned to a soldier. "Grab the doctor." I sent them to get water for the horses, Brendan said. That was this morning, and it wasn't until later this afternoon Nyla realized they hadn't returned. You waited until this afternoon to find that they were missing? You know how kids are, sir. They tend to play when they get near the river. I always make sure they go in pairs because sometimes the river can get dangerous. I thought they were just playing and running late for chores. What the fuck happened to your son's arm? I'm not sure, General. Looks to be a fracture, a voice said, entering the room. It was Zebulon Haggerty, the field medic, and what passes for a doctor in these parts. Everyone just called him Doc, which he hated. The ulna has been snapped, Doc said, examining Friedrich's arm. Strange. Haven't you seen a break before, Doc? Malcolm asked. Well, sure, I've seen plenty, but there's no bruising. A break like that should have had major bruising. Is there anything on the girl? Just the same gash in her throat, Brandon said. But no broken bones that I know of. Well, judging by the marks around the wounds, I'd say the attacker was human. Those are human teeth marks. Turn them over, please. The men turned the children's bodies over onto their stomachs. Doc pulled out a scalpel and makes a slit along the left buttock of Friedrich. Curious, Doc says. Look, Doc, Malcolm says, can you share what's going on in that head of yours, or you just gonna fillet up this man's kids in front of him like a walleye? Well, there's no blood, Doc says impatiently. There's absolutely no fluid in their bodies. Rigor should be settling in their muscle tissue. But there's nothing there. It's like dry meat. If anything, the blood should have coagulated on their backsides, but as you can see, nothing. Zebulon went over to Linda's body and made a few slits in her torso and got the same results. No fluids came out of the open, dry, leathery flesh. He opened her mouth, and the tongue was also dried up and shriveled like a prune. My apologies to Mr. Gerhardt, Zebulon said. I don't mean to be insensitive to your great loss. General, Brendan said, who could have done this? Who could have done this to children? The general bit down on the stem of his pipe. His eyes narrowed into concentrated slits. Gotta be the Injuns, he spoke softly. They've been getting restless as of late. Heard talk about some settlements being attacked near Sleepy Eye and Mountain Lake. But would they bite the throats out of children? Mr. Gerhardt, these are savages we're talking about. I've seen them do so many horrid things to the white man, hell, even to their own kind. I don't think they care about white children. Imagine they drain the blood of your kids for some of them heathen rituals. Surely you'll send some men down to guard our village? Most of my men are away in Mankato grabbing supplies. They won't be back here until next week if they don't run into any trouble. I'll send Schmidt and Burroughs down with you. 2 men, General Curtis? Surely you can... I can't spare any more. His tone was sharp. You ought to have enough guns amongst the men in your village to defend yourselves until my men get back. Brendan looked defeated. Go on now, Curtis said, grabbing straw for his pipe. Bury your kids and stay cautious. You have my utmost condolences, Gerhardt. I'll send some troops down when my boys return. Thank you, Brendan said, and left with his escorts and the corpses of his children. His troops had followed the old dirt trail that had been broken in by so many travels that had gone between New Ulm and Fort Ridgely. It began along the riverbank, and the only trouble they dealt with was the occasional swarm of bloodthirsty mosquitoes. They came upon the great stone wall that surrounded the fort. Guards at the turrets welcomed them in, and the heavy wooden gate was open for their 4 wagons full of supplies and 18 men. Lieutenant Aiken was at the lead, and was greeted by General Curtis as he dismounted his horse. "What news you have for me from the big city?" Malcolm asked. Aiken unbuckled his saddlebags and ordered his men to put the supplies away in the storage house. "The usual, sir," Aiken said, flopping his saddlebags over his shoulder. "Whiskey? I'd love a whiskey." "Hey, Jim." "Well, I'm glad that you're helping your son. He needs you more than I do, buddy." They went into the general's quarters, where there was a roaring fire and freshly baked bread on the table. Some churned butter and homemade jam sat next to the aromatic golden loaf. "No troubles on the trip back?" the general asked while dispensing a glass of whiskey. "None, sir," Aiken said, going through his bags. "We did encounter some Indians between Cambria and here, but they only watched us cautiously as we passed by." "Probably wondering if you're carrying supplies for them," the general laughed. "Mankato and some of the surrounding villages have been having issues with some type of outbreak for the past few months. Said it may be something for us to be wary of. Maybe you want to let Doc know." "What type of outbreak?" "People were turning up dead. None of their doctors could figure out what was causing it. Random people just found dead." "Were there any symptoms? Wounds?" "I wasn't really paying attention, sir. To be honest, that's more Doc's forte, not my..." "Were they drained of their blood?" "Pardon?" "Drained of their blood. Did the victims have gashes in their throats? What was the condition they found those bodies in?" "Like I said, I didn't really pay attention." "God damn it, man!" Malcolm pounded his fist on the table. "Sorry, sir." Aiken flipped through the stack of papers he had pulled out of his saddlebag. "Here, I've got paperwork their doctor had sent along with me." The general snatched it from his hands and began to scan the papers. "What's this about, sir?" Aiken asked timidly. "A little over a week ago, Brendan Gerhardt came up here with the bodies of his 2 children. The general flipped through page after page and then stopped on an autopsy report. "Well, shit," he said, and began to chew on the stem of his pipe. Subject: Velma Schultz, age 31. Cause of death unknown. Notes: Subject was brought in by Sheriff Newsom by wagon. Initial examination showed the subject to be pale to an utmost blue-gray color, even the lips, which I found strange since lips usually bruise or hold a purplish color after death. The skin is dry like parchment, and even the tongue retains no moisture. After dissection, I was astonished to find no bodily fluid in any of the usual places blood and other fluids collect after death. There are visible wounds in the subject's neck and also on the inner left thigh. No bruising exists. After removing the heart and the liver, I noticed they had the texture of tanned leather, and they were wrinkled as if they were parched for some time. There are similarities in the findings as are with C reports 14A through 14Q, the others who were brought in from around the Mankato area. Conclusion: cause of death is undetermined. Perhaps this is some sort of disease that is spreading either by animal or human contact. Sending results to other agencies to examine. He read through a few more reports stating the same findings. Send some of our men down to Gerhardt Mills, the general said. First thing in the morning. Have Doc look these over. Yes, sir, Aiken said, wondering if there was going to be another glass of whiskey. None came, so he excused himself and headed out to talk to his men. Although Aiken hadn't slept much, he chose to lead 5 of his soldiers down to Gerhardt Mills at the break of dawn. The general hadn't been specific, only that he wanted more men garrisoned at their tiny river village. He stopped his group and pulled out his field glasses. What is it, sir? Sergeant Lafayette asked. Aiken only raised his hand to silence him and focused on the circle of turkey vultures hovering above the area that would be Gerhardt Mills. Are those hawks? Lafayette asked. No, Sergeant, Aiken said impatiently. Those are turkey vultures, and not a good sign. They usually circle like that when there's carrion below, and there are a lot of them. As Aiken rode ahead, Lafayette looked reluctant to move forward. His fellow soldiers pushed by and lightly galloped down the slope to the small village. They approached the clearing, and everything looked normal, but it was dead quiet. Not even the birds and squirrels were chattering, just the rush of river water passing over the rocks, and logs peeking over the surface. The 2 soldiers who were sent here last week were also absent. One of them should at least be here at the village square. Lafayette! Aiken called out. His sergeant rode up alongside him, looking reluctant. Yes, sir. I want you and the others to spread out and find out what you can. Check all the buildings in the surrounding woods. Yes, sir. Is there a problem? No, sir. See if you can find our boys who are supposed to be here guarding the place. As his men spread out and began calling out and searching for the people of the village and the 2 soldiers, Aiken dismounted and pulled out a leather pouch and began to roll himself a cigarette. He assumed he knew exactly what happened to the people of Gerhardt Mills, because of the rumors he heard in both Mankato and Newell. The Santee Sioux had been planning something. Chief Little Crow was done negotiating with the government and the military. His people were starving to death because the government wasn't following through with their promise. This has got to be their handiwork, he thought to himself, striking a match and touching it to the end of his smoke. But where is the blood? There isn't even a sign of a struggle. No blood, no arrows, not even a... Lieutenant Aiken! A few of his men had come back, dragging Private Schmidt, one of the soldiers who had come here the week before. They propped him up next to the horse trough Aiken's horse was drinking from. He was young, 19, and he looked scared, his blue eyes filled with fear and drool frothing at the corners of his mouth. Schmidt! Aiken slapped the young soldier. Snap out of it, man! Please, Schmidt stuttered. Please, we must get out of here. What are you on about? Where is everyone? Oh, dear God, they're all gone. Evidently, you're the only survivor. Now, were they kidnapped? What happened here? Was it the Redskins? They were pale, colorless. Oh, God. Pale? They were white? Like us? Schmidt shook his head violently. No! Aiken grabbed him by the hair and dunked his head into the water of the horse trough. Snap out of it, goddamn you, he spat. Where is everyone? Where's Private Burroughs? He should have been with you. We have to go, Schmidt said, shivering and dripping. We have to get out, go before they come back. Where did you find him? Aiken asked one of his men. He locked himself in the privy, the soldier said. There was nobody else, no bodies, no signs of... They all nodded in the negative. All right, mount up. And let's get him up to the dock, Lafayette. I want you to come with me. Yes, sir, Lafayette said and watched his fellow soldiers leave. Aiken rolled 2 cigarettes and offered one to his nervous sergeant. I don't smoke, sir, he said. You do now. Lafayette took the cigarette and inhaled it as Aiken lit it. He coughed as his lungs rejected the harsh smoke. I suppose you think you don't drink either? Aiken asked, passing over a shiny brass flask. Lafayette took it from him and tilted a sip into his mouth. Oh, come on now, my men are heartier drinkers than that. The sergeant tipped the flask back, and he coughed even harder than when he drew in the cigarette. Sorry, young man. His apology seemed superficial. But you look like you were on your way out, like Schmidt back there. I need my men a little more put together. Sorry, sir. The sergeant's cheeks were reddened. I know you knew, and they transferred you here from St. Anthony, am I correct? Yes, sir. So you haven't seen any action, have you? Not really, sir, no. I was too young for the Civil War. But my daddy and my older brother were in it, and my brother didn't come back. A lot of brothers didn't come back from that. Anyhow, I think it's about time you got your feet wet. What? What do you mean? What's the closest you ever been to an Injun, son? I've seen them in the city. A couple along the way from Mankato. But you never faced one in battle, huh? No, sir. Tonight, you and I, we're gonna camp out here. What was that, sir? That's right. We're gonna go over to Mr. Gerhardt's mill and camp out right up there on the top floor. Gives us the advantage. The higher ground, so when them savages come back, boom! The soldier's eyes got wide, and he took another gulp from the flask and hit the cigarette again. Do you think they'll be back? He finally asked after another coughing spell. Yep, Aiken said and started to look around towards the woods. In fact, I don't think they left. I think they're up there in the hills, spying on us right now. The private grabbed his rifle and slid the bolt into place and looked around paranoidly. Aiken smiled. Now you're ready. He blew out a lungful of smoke and patted the kid on the back. Let's go find us a good spot up in the mill. Several rods south of Gerhardt Mills was the Dakota settlement. Oh my God, go on. The mood was tense amongst the tribe, not because of the whispers of war with the whites, but because of the vision shared by Redbird. Hoping to isolate themselves from the coming doom, they fortified their village, and they took turns watching over their town. They traveled in packs when foraging and fishing, but otherwise no one left the outskirts of their camp. Perhaps what was out there would feed on the whites and leave them be. How long do we wait? The chief, Standing Bear, asked the shaman. They're already here, I think, the shaman said gravely. I've heard their screams in the middle of the night. They echoed through the valley. I don't like all this hiding. We must fight this enemy. We don't know their numbers. Their numbers don't matter. If we wait, their numbers may grow, like the white men. We are already losing what Creator has given us. We cannot take much more. They are not like anyone else we have ever faced before. They are like the Wendigo, ravenous hunters without spirits. We must caution observe, and learn from what's around us. Chief! It was a scout coming into the teepee. Come quick! Standing Bear and the shaman stepped outside and walked along with everyone else who had heard about what was sighted on the banks of the river. At first it looked like a log jam. The river was swollen and trying to flow around the obstacles that were impeding its current. But the women who were on the shore began to scream and the men began to howl. The chief ran down to see what the commotion was about. It was at least 38 bodies floating about, caught up in the rapids and fallen trees, mutilated and hardly recognizable, all of them bottlenecked at the bend of the river. They were the settlers from what the white men called the Gerhardt Mills. Grab spears, the shaman ordered. Move them to clear the way. The presence curses our village. Be quick, so that they move along elsewhere. What are these things? The chief asked his shaman. What caused this? They are Jumlin. I thought they had faded out long ago, long before I was a child at my mother's breast. But Redbird's visions, my own visions, and this. Jumlin, those are old children's tales. They can't possibly be. When the bodies are cleared, we must do ceremony. Have the men build the sweat lodges. I don't think we'll be able to avoid the coming battle. They may bring it to us. The air had weight to it, a hot, almost unbearable weight when one stepped into the lodge from the cool night air. Sweat poured from Standing Bear and his trusted warriors. The old shaman didn't have a bead drip from a pore. He only poured a ladle of water on the glowing stones and breathed the steam in. You carry with you the cloud of doubt, the shaman said to the chief. The chief took his seat across from the shaman and wouldn't look him in the eyes. Yes, he answered. You're a young chieftain. Your father passed on too soon. What does that have to do with... You've not lived long enough to be wise. Your mind is cynical to the old ways. But, medicine man, the things you speak of, they are ancient tales. They are also Cherokee problem, not a... Do you think the Wendigo cares about whether your tribe is Anishinaabe or Choctaw or Blackfoot? Do the Thunder Beings only protect us from the serpents? No. No, it was thought the Jumlin were killed off long ago, but here they are. Their numbers took out an entire settlement of whites, and they have guns. Well then, wise one, what is it that we do? The only path that I can see is to ask the men at the fort to protect us. We will fight alongside them if necessary. There was a lot of argument about this path. The old man banged his walking stick 7 times on the stone floor and silenced the lodge. They cannot be trusted, Standing Bear said. They've cheated us of our promised rations and clothing. We will not make the coming winter if this keeps up. His men agreed. While this may be true, the shaman said, this may be our only course. For in my visions, and the vision of Redbird, we see only death for our people. Yeah. Night had fallen, and Sergeant Lafayette was trying desperately to keep his eyes open. He had taken more than he could handle from Aiken's flask, and now was regretting it. They were holed up at the top of Gerhardt's textile mill. From the small dusty window, they could peek down and see the entire village. From Aiken's side, he could see the river. The woods had been quiet all day, but tonight they could hear drums pounding distantly to the south. Their beat matched the beating of his heart. "You hear that?" Aiken whispered. Lafayette nodded, eyes wide with fear. "That means they're getting ready. Indians don't hunt at night, so that can only mean they're coming back to finish what they started." We can't possibly fight them all off on our own," Lafayette said. "They will only send a few of the best. Scouts, probably. Still, if they... Are you scared, Sergeant?" "Yes." "Good." They were in luck. The moon was full and the sky was clear. There was a bluish glow about the village and reflecting off the river, though a slight fog began to creep off the water and made its way along the shores into the village square. "Do you see anything?" Aikens asked in a harsh whisper. "No," the sergeant whispered back. "There's a fog moving in, though. Hope it doesn't get too thick." "The river looks calm. I don't think... Sir, there's something!" "Quiet down, idiot!" Aiken slid over to see out Lafayette's window. "What? What is..." Coming out of the woods were 3, perhaps 4, Indians crouching through the new ground cover of fog. "I see them," Aiken said. "Rascals are all painted white to camouflage themselves in the fog. Get your rifle ready, Sergeant. Your balls are about to drop." Lafayette slowly pushed open the window and aimed his rifle towards their target. "Sir," he said, trying not to betray the terror in his voice. "What is it, man?" Aiken asked impatiently. "2 of them are... women." "So? They're savages. They didn't care about our women when they took the village, did they?" "Well, no, sir, but shouldn't we be the better? Shouldn't we try to be better than them?" "Take the goddamn shot, Sergeant, or I'll put my bayonet into you." Lafayette's hand felt for the bolt to make sure it was in place, and with his thumb he flicked off the safety. He breathed in deep, getting ready to take his shot on the man. As he blew out his breath, he pulled the trigger. A pop and a hiss, and his bullet hit the horse trough Aiken's horse had been drinking out of earlier that day. A loud whack as it hit the side, and then water began to pour out of the hole. The 4, yes, there were 4, Indians hissed and looked around to see where the shot came from. Lafayette cocked his rifle again and took aim, but the figures down there were moving about too much. "You're pathetic," Aiken said louder than before. "Move it!" He pushed the sergeant aside and lowered his own rifle down at the village square. He had heard them and were walking or looking up at the top window of the mill. "God damn it," the lieutenant spat. "We've been spotted." He took aim at one of the women and fired. Another pop and a hiss, and then his bullet struck her in the throat. She let out a gurgling, wet cry and fell to the ground, holding her neck. The other 3 ran towards the door of the mill. "They're coming," Aiken yelled. "Get your pistol ready." A loud crash of splintering wood and breaking iron hinges erupted from downstairs. Aiken reloaded his rifle and aimed for the spiral staircase that wound the perimeter inside the mill. Lafayette scrambled for his pistol, loaded a shot, and aimed a shaky hand towards the steps. They made no effort to conceal the rampage. They raced up the stairs at an impossible speed. Aiken's shot missed the lead and punched through the wall. Lafayette's shot hissed through the air and caught the lead man center in the forehead, and he dropped to the side and thudded on the ground below. They did not have time to reload their firearms, and the other female leapt on top of Lafayette, gnashing her pointed teeth at him. She was so close he could hear them clicking as she snapped her jaws. He screamed for help. Aiken met the male head-on, using the blade from his bayonet, and stuck it into its chest. It growled at him and blood dribbled from its mouth. The lieutenant realized that these were no normal Indians. Their skin was not painted white. They were pale, blue veins pulsing just under their opaque flesh. His eyes were rimmed with what looked like blood, and the teeth, oh dear God, the teeth were pointed into needle-like tips. They were dirty and dripped with whatever it was that their last meal was. He heard Lafayette screaming for help, but was busy trying to keep his own assailant away from him as he danced on the end of Aiken's bayonet. The other male had come up last and slid down by Lafayette's leg as his female companion was trying to chew onto his neck. He felt a sharp, ragged pain in his inner thigh as the male bit down into him. He lost control of the female, and she growled and dipped her face into his neck. Lafayette's scream was cut off as her fangs ripped through his larynx. He felt his life flowing out of his body, the two pale ones grunting and sucking away at him greedily as the fight was starting to leave him. Aiken pushed his assailant towards the edge of the steps, and with a heavy effort pushed the thing over, realizing his rifle and all left to tumble down the steps. He turned, drawing his sword, and stabbed the male feasting on nourishment through Lafayette's femoral artery, through the base of the skull. It let out a brief screech and then was still. The female pulled her face off the dying private and turned to face Aiken, who had swung the sword into her neck, and it ripped clean through, and her severed head plopped down onto the groaning sergeant. He jumped over the bodies and descended the steps cautiously, holding his sword out in case there were more. The mill was clear, and he stepped out into the night air. The coolness outside raised the short hairs on his sweaty flesh. He ran into the livery, mounted his horse, and galloped out into the village square. He looked around, and he could swear he heard something hissing in the darkness of the woods. He kicked his horse, and they rode onto the small trail that led to the fort. Fort Ridgely stood at the top of a gorge that overlooked the Minnesota River Valley. Surrounded by birch trees and fortified with large river stones, it was nearly impenetrable. They had the vantage point in 360 degrees. Tonight the fort was on high alert. General Gertis, having heard of the findings at Gerhardt Mills, he had the place on lockdown. They were all armed to the teeth and awaited an Indian attack. "General," one of his soldiers came running into the quarters, "savages are approaching." "How many?" Gertis said, strapping on his holster. "Looks like a whole damn village." "Ready the cannons and fortify the gate." The general climbed the ladder to the catwalk and used his field glass to see. They were definitely Indians, carrying torches, some on horseback and many of them on foot. "Aim for the front line, men," he hollered out, "and prepare to fire." He watched the tribe climbing the hill on the path. Two of them on horses rode up ahead. "Get ready," he said. "There are two of them riding ahead." The horsemen stopped at the clearing before the fort. One horse carried a scout, and an old man rode behind him. The other was Chief Standing Bear, and he was holding on to a carved branch with a white flag tied to the top end of it. "Hold your fire," he shouted. He slid down and had his men unbolt the gate as he walked out, with 10 rifles pointed at the 3 natives ahead of them. "What's your business with us?" Gertis said. "We come in peace," Standing Bear said. "We come bearing urgent news." "Well, I don't trust you. And I don't trust you," but I've been advised to cast that aside and talk to you like reasonable men. Then talk. I'm afraid it is dangerous for us both if we stand out here. There a reason why you brought your whole tribe with you? I'm asking you to shelter and protect my people. Me and my warriors would join yours to fight the evil that's coming for us. Gertis looked into Standing Bear's eyes. There was a struggle within him, and he figured there must be a particularly good reason for him to humble himself in front of his entire tribe. Lower your guns, man, he said. Let them on through. His men looked suspiciously at him, and then cautiously led the entire tribe into the fort, closing the large wooden gate behind them and bolting it closed. Sergeant, Gertis called over to one of his men and whispered, have your men up there keep their rifles on the lot. Any funny business, and I want every single one of them gunned down. Understand? Yes, sir, the sergeant said. All right, Chief, he said, addressing Standing Bear. You and the old man join me in my quarters. Let's hear this out. Standing Bear's tribe sat around a great fire that snapped and crackled in the center of the fort. They were silent, and it made Gertis's men uneasy. The ones up on the catwalk walked anxiously back and forth, checking the perimeter and then checking the crowd of savages below. A fog had filled the valley below and carpeted the canopy of woods. If one were quiet, they could hear a slight rustling within that fog. There were eyes in there somewhere, blood-rimmed eyes staring out of the fog and into the fort. No crickets chirped and no frogs croaked tonight. The quiet was almost deafening. What in God's green earth is a jumlin? Gertis asked impatiently. He held his guard down and risked the safety of his men and compromised the security of his fort for some Injun mumbo-jumbo. You cannot afford to scoff at our beliefs, Standing Bear said. I did not believe it myself, but seeing your people from the white village floating dead in the river, I could not fully ignore the signs. How the hell do I know that it wasn't you and your people that done this to Gerhardt's people? That this whole Jumlin thing isn't just a ruse? General Gertis, the shaman spoke up. Let me tell you the tale of the Jumlin. Yes, it was a story the elders told us when we were young, and perhaps they were like the fairy stories you tell your own children. You are young, like our bull-headed chief, just as stubborn and doubtful as he is too. You may be wise about battles and your guns, and even about cheating my people out of their allotted share of supplies. Hey! The general snapped and was going to reprimand the old man, but he raised his hand. Put all this aside, for the sake of your men and my people, even to the other white settlers who live along the river. Long ago, soon after our ancestors journeyed to Turtle Island, there was a wise old medicine man, like me. He was married to a woman named Laughing Sky. He was deeply in love with her, but she was barren and could not provide him with an heir. He used all the medicine and prayers he could, and raised them up to the Creator. But his prayers, he felt, were ignored, and he became bitter. So he turned to the dark magic, conjuring a demon, calling himself the Jumlin. He was possessed by this demon, and he had relations with Laughing Sky. She bore him many children, but the demon didn't stop with just her. He raped the rest of the women of the tribes as well, and they gave birth to demons who were bloodthirsty just like their father. He and his children set forth on many the Cherokee nation and spread their sickness, raping and draining the blood of our ancestors. A great hunting party was formed, and they found and killed most of the Jumlin, including the possessed medicine man himself. But his youngest, the last born to Laughing Sky, lived. His name was Laughing Bear, and he ran into hiding, spreading his disease from tribe to tribe. And now we are faced with his menace. General Gertis nibbled on the tip of his pipe, staring at the old man. I've got a good mind to throw you and your superstitious lot out in the fog, he finally said. Blood-sucking, horny demons, huh? General Gertis, the shaman said, do not let your own beliefs blind you to what is about to... Enough! Take these two out of here and throw them and their people back out there of the fort. General, lucky I don't order my men just to shoot y'all. Good luck to you, sir. You are a fool, Standing Bear shouted as the soldiers took hold of him and began to pull him out. Send me and the medicine man out there, but please, keep my people safe, at least the women and children. Enough, get them out of here. His tribe all stood up as he was led out, with a gun at the back of his head. There was fear on their faces. This treacherous white man has failed our people again, Standing Bear shouted to his people. They're sending us back out there to die. There were shouts of protest until they realized that all guns were trained on them. Leave peacefully, Gertis shouted, like you came here, or there will be a massacre. Gentlemen, open the gates, if you please. Some of the women were screaming, and the children crying. They didn't hear the hoofbeats galloping through the thick fog and the shriek of the man riding the horse. When the gate opened, breaking from the fog, Lieutenant Aiken rode straight into the fort, nearly knocking over some of the tribe that were making their way out. Close the damn gate, he shouted. Close it now! They're right behind me! What the hell is this all about, Sergeant? Gertis asked. Aiken fell from his saddle and laid there in the dirt as people gathered around him. General Gertis pushed his way through the crowd and knelt down. What the fuck are you ranting about, you fool? He barked. They're out there, Aiken said. They killed Lafayette. They killed everyone. Who did? The pale ones. They're right behind me. You must shut the gate. You talking nonsense, man. Get your wits about you. General! Shouted a man from up on the catwalk. Everyone turned and looked at the front gate. Coming from the fog at a slow, deliberate pace came the Jumlin, an ancient race that hungered for the blood that ran through the veins of every man, woman, and child within the fort. They came, line after line, most of them naked but barely visible as they blended with the thick white fog. Close the damn gate, General Malcolm Gertis ordered. But there wasn't any time. The Jumlin flowed into the fort like a wave crashing on the beach. The men on the catwalk opened fire on some of them, but there were other pale ones that leapt up the fort walls as if they were light as a feather. And they went from soldiers to being food. Screams echoed throughout the river valley. Cries could be heard as far as New Ulm and Sleepy Eye. It lasted past the hour of midnight. Beyond what you could hear the sucking sounds, the grunting and groaning of pleasure as every drop of nourishment fed the nomadic demons. 2 weeks later, and many miles west, in a small saloon in a town that was then known as Eagle Lake, the sheriff sat belly up at the bar. A half-drunk bottle of rot gut sat next to his hat, and a burning cig smoldered in the ashtray. Sheriff Rasmussen! It was the shoeshine kid, Everett. Sheriff Rasmussen, come quick! The old man shifted on his bar stool and set a drunken gaze on the excited boy. What's got you all troubled, Everett? He said. You look like you seen a ghost. The boy removed his hat, out of respect for the women folk who were present, and wiped his brow, trying to catch his breath. It's Eve Jameson, he said. They found her dead in her bed this morning. She was white as a ghost. Easy now, kid. Who found her? You're sure she's dead? Her kids found her. They came and got me. She's got to be dead. She was all pale and her veins stuck out and stuff. The sheriff took another swill of the bottle and corked it. He pinched the dying cigarette, stabbed it into the corner of his mouth, and stood up on wobbly legs. Well, let's go then, he said to the kid. Eve Jameson was the town widow. Her husband had drowned in the lake in a fishing incident about a year ago. They lived just on the other side of the street. Walking in, the sheriff noticed there were no sounds in the house. Were the kids still here? He asked the boy. The boy nodded. His boots clopped softly on the wood floor, and he peeked his head around the corner of her bedroom doorway. The bed lay empty. Bed covers were laid to the side, and there was no sign of her or the kids. You sure you ain't playing a joke on the old sheriff? He asked the kid. No, sir. The kid's eyes were wide with disbelief. I swear she was right there lying still under the covers. She was pale and lifeless. And Jimmy and Sally were right there by her bedside when I came and got you. Honest. Well, maybe she's just feeling under the weather. Maybe she took the kids out fishing by the lake or something. Get some fresh air. I swear she was dead, Sheriff. Well, you ain't no doctor, son. You could have just been mistaken. As the two left the house, a muffled cry that was heard by no one uttered from the spare bedroom. A lifeless little girl lay empty on the rug while her little brother whimpered behind the cold, pale hand of his mother, who drank deeply from his neck. And that, my friends, is The Pale Ones. So, be sure to come and join me next week. Hopefully I got all my camera issues figured out here on my laptop. Because I think my phone is about ready to die. So, anyhow, and I hope to God that I'm able to save this video as well. So, I don't think I've ever done this on the phone before. So, yeah. But anyhow, you got to do what you got to do, right? Right. So, thank you guys very much for joining me. Wish me luck tomorrow on my test. And, yeah, and wish me good health. I am feeling really crappy. So, yeah. So, hopefully we will chat with you all next week. And, yeah, I'll be an ambulance man. So, all right. Good to see you guys. Thank you all for stopping out. Hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the story. Yeah. Next week's is pretty good, too. So, we'll get into that. All right. Talk to you later. Mwah. Love you. And good night. Now, how do you end this thing? Nightmares. I had issues trying to watch it tonight. Good luck tomorrow. Thanks, Jessica. Sorry you had issues. Yeah, it's crazy. I think it's just because it's on the phone or whatever. But hopefully everything will be better next week. All right. Bye, everybody.